I rented this cabin near Lake Placid, in the north of New York State, in late fall. I needed some time away from everything: noise, people, cell phone ringing. I just wanted silence and cold. The region was isolated, but safe, according to the announcement. The cabin had heating, fireplace, internet, and, what really attracted me, it was surrounded by trees everywhere. When I arrived, I found the place even better than it looked in the photos. I locked everything inside, checked the entry points, and installed some simple cameras that I took myself, more as a precaution than out of fear. One at the front door, one on the side, and one in the back, pointing directly to the service entrance that led to the forest. The first night was quiet. Intense cold, but the heater could handle it. I slept early. Already in the second morning, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. with a dry noise, a knock on the back door. It wasn't strong. It was dry, as if someone had touched their fingers and given 2 slow touches. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to understand if it was a dream or a reality. I got up slowly, without turning on the light, and went to the corridor. The back door was closed, with the padlock that I had put myself. But something seemed wrong. It was as if the air was different there, as if there was someone on the other side, standing still, just waiting. I went back to the room without opening the door, took the notebook, and accessed the camera app. The back one was working normally, and when I pulled the history of the dawn, there it was. A body standing in front of the door, half hidden in the shade of the roof. You couldn't see the face. It seemed that the person made a point of keeping his head down. But it was clearly someone standing, motionless, looking straight inside. What stopped me was time. The recording showed this figure standing there for more than an hour, without moving. Just stop. No attempt to open the door, no hand movement, nothing. And the padlock was still intact. The image was clear enough to see that it wasn't someone from the region there by mistake. The clothes didn't match the weather. It looked too thin for the cold that night. He also didn't carry a flashlight, backpack, nothing that suggested he was a wanderer. Only presence. That gave me a horrible feeling. A kind of discomfort that you can't explain properly. It wasn't panic, it was more like an uncomfortable certainty that that person knew I was seeing. I didn't do anything at that time. I just locked the bedroom door, went to bed, and stayed awake until dawn. I didn't hear anything else, but I couldn't sleep either. When the sun finally appeared, I went straight outside to see if I could find any footprint, any sign that someone was really there. The floor was covered with dry leaves and a little frozen mud, and it was easy to see that there was something strange there. There were clear footprints coming from the trail towards the back door, but there was no return. No return. As if the person had appeared there, stopped for an hour, and simply disappeared. This bothered me all day. I even thought about leaving the cabin and ending the trip, but the reservation still had 2 more nights, and I tried to convince myself that it was just someone lost who left when he realized that the house was occupied. The next morning, I left the outside lights on and stayed awake on purpose with the camera monitor on. Nothing. No movement. Total silence. But when I went to check the system at the end of the next afternoon, I noticed that the back camera had crashed between 2:13 and 3:45 a.m. Too long a time. And when the recording came back, the wooden chair I left on the deck, right next to the door, was turned on its back, pointing to the door, as if someone had been sitting there. But I never left that chair facing this side, and no one else had access to the place. That's when the real fear began to hit, the feeling of being tested. That night, I locked everything again, but this time I put a heavy piece of furniture in front of the back door and left a kitchen knife under the pillow. I know it seems exaggerated, but the level of discomfort had surpassed any logical justification. I was lying in the dark, just listening to the sounds of the forest. When it was around 3:10 a.m., I heard it again. 2 dry touches. Same beat. Same door. Same time. My hair stood on end instantly. I got up slowly with the camera monitor on, and there it was again, the same figure in the same place. Stop. But this time there was something else. A slight body swing, as if you were laughing. I couldn't stay anymore. I arranged everything in a hurry in the morning and left hours earlier than expected. I gave the key and didn't say anything to the owner. He would probably think I was making it up. A few days later, still moved, I opened the recordings to show it to a friend. But the videos were gone. The history was there, but the files were corrupted. Only the time log remained. No images. To this day I don't know who, or what, was watching me from that door. But I'm sure of one thing. That crash was not a route error, nor a coincidence. It was someone who wanted to be noticed, but not to enter. Still, Would you have the courage to open the door if you knew that someone stood there, staring at you for more than an hour, doing nothing? Because I didn't have it. We rented this cabin on impulse, to get out of the routine and celebrate the end of the semester. It was a very isolated place, with no cell phone signal, and with a kind of retro vibe, fireplace, antique furniture, and a balcony that overlooked an endless wall of trees. There were 4 of us, me, Vinicius, Rafa, and Bruno. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, took food, drink, and some games. The idea was to disconnect from the world for a weekend, and just enjoy it. The night was quiet, we laughed a lot, talked outside, and went to bed late. I locked the door inside with that thick wooden lock that made a dry noise when it fit. No one entered or left after that. The next morning, Bruno didn't show up for breakfast. At first, we thought he was just sleeping more. I went to knock on the door of his room, but it was open, and the room was empty. The bed was a little messy, as if he had gotten up during the night. But the strange thing was to see his shoes in the corner, the open backpack with everything inside, cell phone, wallet, charger. Even his coat was still hanging. We called for him around the cabin. We walked a few meters into the woods, but nothing. No trace, no sound. And the most bizarre, the front door was still locked inside, just like we left it at night. The atmosphere got tense very quickly. We tried to stay calm, thinking that maybe he had woken up early, gone for a walk, and got lost. But the surrounding forest was closed, without trails or clearings, and the ground was moist from the morning fog. There was no footprint coming out of the hut, neither from him, nor from anyone else. We started walking in circles, calling for him, until that strange panic hit, that heavy silence. We went back inside and tried to understand what could have happened. We looked at cell phone cameras, photo gallery, even the stories of the night before. Everything normal. But from then on, the tension didn't leave the environment anymore. We called the police, but the answer was to file. They said that because I was an adult, with intact belongings and no clear sign of danger, we needed to wait a while longer. I couldn't think straight anymore. Vinicius got sick, locked in the room. Rafa started saying that he didn't want to spend the night there anymore. When it got dark, we tried to leave some lights on and locked everything again. No one wanted to sleep. We stayed in the living room, half silent, listening to any noise. And it was there, around 4 a.m., that the front doorknob turned. We froze. I remember the right sound of the wooden lock creaking slowly, as if it had been forced carefully so as not to scare. When the door opened, it was Bruno. But not the Bruno we knew. He entered with a pale face, his gaze completely lost, as if he were sleepwalking. No one had a reaction at the time. He didn't say a word, he just walked slowly to his own room and closed the door. It was as if nothing had happened. We stood there, looking at each other, trying to understand if that was real. Vinicius went to the 4th minute later, but Bruno was already lying down, with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, he still hadn't said anything. He only responded with head movements, but he seemed unfocused, as if he wasn't even really there. We tried to ask where he had gone, what had happened, if he needed help. But he just said he didn't remember anything. No details. He said he thought he had slept all night. No explanation, no injury, no dirt on the clothes. It was as if he had disappeared and returned out of nowhere. We took him away on the same day, without talking too much during the journey. The return trip was silent. The only thing that echoed in my head was that door locked inside, and the certainty that no one went out through it that night. After that weekend, we were never the same again. Bruno remained strange for weeks. We went out, tried to talk, but he was always with that distant look, as if part of him had stayed there in that forest. Eventually, he went back to acting normally, or at least it seemed. But we knew there was something wrong. We never touched on the subject with him again. Rafa and Vinicius also preferred to go on with life, pretending that none of that had happened. But I still have a copy of that cabin's key, and sometimes I find myself staring at her, remembering that the only thing he took away was silence. To this day, I don't know what happened to him during those hours. I just know that something took Bruno away that night, and returned only the body. And every time I hear a wooden crack or a latch being forced, my heart crashes. And you? Have you ever seen someone come back, different? We stayed in a simple cabin in the interior of Alabama, in the middle of a private forest reserve. It was one of those places with a basic structure: bed, kitchenette, tiny bathroom, and wooden windows with thin screen. There was no air conditioning, only a fan, and that night the heat was suffocating. It was summer, and even with the windows open, the air seemed still thick. We slept covered in sweat. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up with a noise that gave me a chill down my spine. It looked like a slow step on the side of the cabin. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't a branch breaking. It was a human step, low but right. I stood still, trying to understand if I was dreaming. But then I heard another sound. A sound that, if I hadn't lived, I would think was an invention breathing. Low, dragged, as if someone was standing right outside the window. I called my wife in a low voice, and she was also already awake, looking at me with the same fear. I got up slowly, went to the living room window, which was still open, and for a second, I found a figure moving away slowly. The only light came from the moon, and even so you could see the mark of a hand right there, on the edge of the window, on the outside of the wood. A wet hand, as if it had sweated, or bled. I ran to close the windows while she locked the door with what gave, chair, backpack, what was within reach. When I went to close the bedroom window, I saw marks on the floor. The earth around the cabin was fluffy, kind of wet, and had barefoot footprints going from one window to another. Clearly human. You can even see the shape of the fingers. No shoes, no animal trail. And the pattern was strange, as if the person had walked in circles around the hut, going from one window to another, stopping at each one. As if I were checking, observing. My stomach was turning, because it was as if someone had already been there for a long time before we woke up. We decided to lock ourselves in the bathroom, because it was the only room without a window. We both sat on the floor, in silence, listening to every little sound. Sometimes the wind hit the leaves lightly, but in the middle of it, we heard something else, steps again, more than one maybe. Slow, spaced, but insistent, as if whoever was there knew that we were afraid. I'm not sure if it was paranoia or reality, but there was a moment when we heard the sound of the front door handle being touched. Just a slight click. They didn't try to force, they didn't hit. They just showed that they were there. When it dawned, the sunlight entering through the creeves was the only thing that gave us courage to leave the bathroom. We opened the door slowly, waiting I don't know what, but the cabin was exactly as we left it. Silent. But on the outside, the story was different. The footprints were still there. Sharper now. And they weren't just around the cabin. There were some further away, going back and forth to a point in the forest. A point where the grass was crumpled, as if someone had been lying or squatting there for a long time. Observing. Waiting. There was no trace of vehicle, bicycle, nothing. Just those barefoot marks. We packed our things in less than 10 minutes. We don't even have coffee. We got in the car and left without looking back. We tried to act as if it were just some crazy person from the region, or a bizarre prank from someone. But none of the explanations is really convincing. Until today, whenever I hear any noise outside the window at night, my whole body crashes. Because that breath we heard didn't just look like someone curious. It looked like someone who already knew exactly where we were sleeping. And maybe, I would have spent much more time there than we imagined. And you? What would you do if you heard someone breathing right outside your window? My brother and I rented a cabin in the countryside of Maine to spend a week off from the city. It was a remote place, really isolated. It was in a very dense forest land, with access by a dirt road full of curves. The cabin was simple but cozy. On the first day, while we were unloading the car, we noticed another construction about 100 meters away, half hidden among the trees. A second hut, with peeling paint and a narrow balcony. It looked old, uninhabited, and at first we didn't give much ball. We assumed it was from another owner, and that it would probably be empty. In the first 2 days, we enjoyed the tranquility. Walks through the forest, beer on the balcony, movies downloaded on the notebook. Everything was very quiet, and at night, only the sound of crickets and wind. On the third day, around 5 in the afternoon, my brother went out to smoke and came back saying that he saw someone in the neighboring cabin. I went to look and, in fact, there was a man standing there, on the edge of the balcony. Really stood still. Dropped shoulders, loose arms next to the body. Just looking. At first, we thought it was the owner or someone staying there, so we gave a nod. He didn't nod. He just kept looking in our direction. At first, we thought that maybe he hadn't seen the nod, or that he was just a kind of grumpy man. But at night, when we were having dinner, I went to the kitchen window and looked by reflex. He was still there. In the same position. Totally motionless. And there was no light on in his cabin. Neither on the balcony nor inside. That bothered me. I called my brother. He looked and just said, "This guy is making me nervous." We decided to let it go and went to sleep. But I woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was looking out the window of our room. When I got the courage to get up and look, I didn't see anyone, but the curtains had moved. The next day, he was no longer on the balcony. We went around our cabin and looked towards the other. The structure seemed even more abandoned in the light of day. That's when my brother suggested we go there to see if everything was okay. We approached slowly, calling, "Sir? Is everything okay over there?" When we went up to the balcony, the wooden floor creaked high. You can see inside through the window. Dust, furniture covered by sheets, no recent movement. The door was locked. There were no car marks or recent footprints on the land around. It seemed that no one had stepped there for a long time. We came back a little confused, but trying to rationalize. Maybe it was someone from the region, some housekeeper, or even an invader, I don't know. But the problem is that night, around 2 in the morning, I heard light knocks on the side of our cabin, as if someone was walking around her, very slowly. I was paralyzed in bed, trying to listen better. Then I heard a sound that I will never forget. The wood of our balcony creaking, step by step, as if someone were out there, standing next to the front door. I didn't mud, not even my brother. After a few minutes, the silence returned, but it was the kind of silence that weighs. That wasn't normal. The next day, already with the sunlight, we went to take one last look at the cabin next door. The balcony was the way we left it, but now there was a grip on the dust, right in the middle, as if someone had stood there during the night. Just one. No other trail around. We finished packing our things and went to check out with the lady in charge of the property, an older woman who lived in the nearby town. While we were handing over the key, I casually commented on the neighboring cabin and the man we saw there. She stopped smiling and said, with the greatest calm in the world, "There's no one in the cabin next door. That property has been empty for more than 15 years. At the time I laughed, kind of embarrassed, thinking that she just didn't know about any recent visit. But she continued, "No one is authorized to be there. The structure is doomed. They have already tried to invade, but the land is private and is locked." My brother and I looked at each other, without knowing what to say. We had no evidence, we had no photo. Just the memory of that man standing, watching, and the sound of the footsteps on the wood of our balcony. On the way back, we drove in silence for a long time. None of us wanted to be the first to say out loud what was going through our heads. If that wasn't someone from the region, what was it? To this day, when I remember the way he stood there, motionless, for hours, looking in our direction, it gives me a strange chill. Because there was no expression, there was no movement, there was nothing, only presence. A presence that didn't seem interested in talking or scaring. It was as if I already knew that we were leaving soon. As if you were waiting. We never go back to that region. And honestly, if one day you rent a cabin in the middle of nowhere, check if the cabin next door is really empty. I rented a cabin in the countryside of Oregon to finish a writing project. I needed silence, isolation, that kind of environment in which time slows down. The cabin was small, made of old wood, with no nearby neighbors, and was on the edge of a hill overlooking the lake. The first 2 days were perfect. I wrote more than in recent weeks, slept early, disconnected from the world. But on the third night, I suddenly woke up around 3 in the morning with a strange sound. It was low, stuffy, as if something were dragging inside the wall. I listened for a few minutes, trying to understand if it was just creaking wood. I thought it was a squirrel, or some nocturnal bug. But the next night, I woke up with that same sound, only this time it was different. It didn't look like an animal. It seemed whisper. A weak sound, right next to the wall, as if someone was talking very close, but on the other side. I even touched my ear, and I swear, I heard something that sounded like words. I couldn't understand, but it seemed like the rhythm of speech. I closed the window, checked the attic, looked under the bed. I went back to sleep with difficulty, trying not to freak out. The next day, I didn't even want to comment with anyone by message. I thought it was something in my head. On the fourth night, what was once just a whisper became something clearer. I was in bed, unable to sleep, and I clearly heard someone laughing softly. It came from the wall behind the desk, where I spent most of my time writing. A muffled laugh, as if she was trying not to be heard. I jumped out of bed, turned on all the lights, and stood in the middle of the room with my heart racing. Nothing moved. I looked at the clock, 3:14 in the morning. I spent the rest of the night awake, sitting on the couch with a kitchen knife by my side. I couldn't stop thinking that maybe there was someone in that cabin with me, just hidden. The next night, what happened that made me pack everything and leave? I woke up with a voice that said my name. Low, slow, almost dragged. "Clara?" A pause, "Clara." More silence, and again, "Clara?" It came from the wall near the head of the bed. It wasn't a dream. I was awake, with my eyes open, feeling the skin shiver to the back of my neck. I ran to the living room, without even putting on slippers. I locked myself in the bathroom and stayed there until dawn. When I left, I went straight to the car. I didn't even turn off the electronic devices from the cabin. I just threw things in the suitcase and left. On the way back, I kept trying to convince myself that I had freaked out. Maybe it was the insulation, maybe it was tiredness, maybe it was just the acoustics of the old wood. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. That voice knew me. You knew my name. And it wasn't my imagination. Because that last morning, before running to the bathroom, I still heard a final thing that made me cold. The phrase, "You shouldn't be here," coming from the same wall, as if it were stuck to it. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't threatening. It was calm. And that was the worst. After I got home, it took me weeks to sleep well again. I even researched about the cabin, but I didn't find any strange information. No death record, no bizarre story, at least not publicly. I tried to forget, but sometimes I still hear sounds at night that remind me of that whisper. The voice saying my name. The muffled laugh. Since then, I've never traveled alone. And if you ever hear someone whisper your name on the other side of the wall, it doesn't answer. For friends went to a cabin that one of the guys in the group had rented on his uncle's recommendation. The place was in the middle of the forest, away from everything, and as we were going to spend 5 days there, Leo had the idea of taking a portable alarm, one of those that you connect to the doors and that beep if they are opened during the night. We laughed at first, but in the end it seemed like a good idea. We installed 2 sensors, one on the front door and the other on the back door. We tested it, it worked right. It closed, we slept peacefully on the first night, without any noise, all right. On the second night, we went to bed late. Beer rolled, conversation, until one by one it was extinguished. We woke up early the next day, and as soon as I went to the kitchen to get water, I noticed the refrigerator door was open. I kept looking, kind of without understanding. When I called the rest of the crowd, that's when we saw something else. One of the mattresses that was leaning against the corner of the room, the one that no one used, had been dragged to the middle of the room. The mark was clear on the wooden floor. The first thing we thought was, someone came in. But no alarm went off. The doors were closed. Nothing broken. Nothing forced. We went into panic mode at the time. We started to check all the windows, the locks, everything. Nothing seemed out of place except the refrigerator and the mattress. The weirdest part? There was food that we had left closed that was out of the package. An open bar, a packet of bread with a bite. It didn't look like an animal, it was a people thing. But here comes the strangest thing. The alarms on the doors were working. We did the test again. We opened the front door with it activated, and the noise was deafening. In other words, if someone had opened any of the doors that morning, we would have woken up. But no one heard anything. We called the alarm technician, the guy who sold it to Leo. He assured that the equipment could not fail like this without emitting at least some signal. If the sensor had stopped working, it would have beeped with error, he said. But that hadn't happened. The only logical explanation would be, someone entered without opening the doors. The atmosphere between us got weird after that. We all started sleeping in the same room, with chairs propping the doors and a kitchen knife on the side of the bed. Even so, no one could sleep properly on the third night. It was as if the house had been violated, and we knew, that something was wrong there. The next morning, we found something else that made us want to leave on the spot. The back door alarm, which should have been glued to the frame, was on the floor. There was no sign of falling, like cracked or with the tape loose. It seemed that someone simply took it off carefully and left it there. But no one heard anything. No noise during the night, no sound of steps, of door opening, nothing. And the most absurd thing, the door lock was still engaged inside. We started thinking about possibilities, like if someone was already in the house before we arrived. We even looked for hat holes or some hidden passage, but there was nothing. It was a simple cabin. 4 walls. 1 entrance, 1 exit. In the end, we stayed 2 more nights, but it was unbearable. The tension only increased. We barely slept. Any pop of the wood made everyone sit on the bed with a racing heart. Last night, I swear I heard footsteps upstairs. The problem is that the cabin didn't have an upstairs. It was ground floor. We left the next day with dark circles, stressed, exhausted. When we told Leo's uncle what had happened, he just said, "Ah, it's not the first time someone has commented on weird things there. We never go back. And if you think an alarm will protect you, think twice." My girlfriend and I rented a cabin in the countryside of Maine to spend a weekend away from everything. The place was very isolated, surrounded by forest, with a stream passing in the background. On the second day, we decided to explore the surrounding area a little and walked to the edge of the forest. That's when ISA found something half buried in the fluffy earth, near an exposed root, a GoPro. It was dirty, without a case, but still working. We thought someone had lost it, and we thought of trying to return it. We went back to the cabin, cleaned, put it to load, and at night we started looking at the files. What we saw there left me with a knot in my stomach. There were videos recorded 3 nights before we arrived, clearly showing the cabin where we were outside. In several sections you could see a couple sleeping in the master bedroom, through the window. The images were taken in the dark, with night vision activated. And there was movement. Someone approaching the balcony, walking around, always with the camera in hand, in silence. The strangest? There was no ambient sound, just a light hiss, almost imperceptible. But the more we watched, the more it seemed that there were very low whispers, as if someone was whispering behind the camera. That night, after watching the videos, we couldn't sleep properly. Every pop of the wood, every wind hitting the window made my heart race. ISA kept insisting that it could be someone who was just making an artistic video, or some nonsense like that, but I felt that there was something wrong. Around 2 in the morning, we began to hear footsteps outside. They were slow, circulating the cabin. Then came long pauses, and then we listened to such whispers again, very low, as if someone was talking to someone else very close to the wall. We turned off all the lights, locked ourselves in the room, and were in absolute silence. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I could feel that they were very close. The sound came from the kitchen window, after the side, as if they were going from one corner of the house to the other. I called the police, without even trying to play the brave one. It took them more than an hour to arrive, but when they arrived, they came with a flashlight, gun in hand, and 2 officers. They entered the forest and about 30 minutes later, returned with a guy handcuffed, dirty, looking disturbed. He didn't say a word. And what gave me the most goosebumps was what they found with him. 2 more cameras with videos of camps, huts, and sleeping people, all filmed at night from outside, as if he was just watching. After the police took him away, we sat for a while on the couch in the cabin in silence. ISA trembled. I felt my stomach turning. One of the police officers came back to explain to us that the man had already been seen roaming properties before, but they had never been able to catch him. He had moved at night and never left a trace. The cameras he carried had recordings of months, maybe years, always the same way. People sleeping, isolated cabins, tents and clearings. I never invaded. I just watched, filmed and vanished. That buried GoPro we found was probably forgotten by him, or discarded on purpose. The next day, we packed our bags and left before the scheduled time. The owner of the cabin apologized, returned the money, and said he had never heard of anything like it there. But I can't help but think about one thing. Why did he never try to get in? What if he was just waiting for the right moment? Since then, every time I travel, I look around. We had rented that cabin with the intention of resting, fishing a little, and spending a few days away from the city. It was me and my friend Kaio, 2 days after the turn of the year. The cabin was simple but comfortable and was on a huge property with a lot of bust around it. On the second day, we decided to walk a little around the area just to explore. About 100 meters into the forest, half hidden among denser trees, we found a smaller construction, made of aged wood and with a simple but closed door. The strange thing is that the door had no lock on the outside. It was one of those with an internal latch. And even so, it was clearly locked inside. At the time, we even considered going back to the cabin, but curiosity won. We pushed the door hard until one of the hinges released, and we managed to open it. The interior was humid, dark, smelling of the closed thing, but what caught our attention was what was inside. An old, stained mattress leaning against the wall. Above it, a blanket that seemed much more recent, as if it had been placed there days ago. On the floor, there were several photos played, all printed, black and white and some colored, with faces that we did not recognize. And between the photos, torn clothes. Small, intimate pieces, t-shirts with dark spots. We stood there for a good seconds, absorbing that, not knowing if we had just invaded something criminal, or worse. We left there with that horrible feeling in our stomachs. No one said anything for a while. We just went back to the cabin in silence, trying to digest what we had seen. It didn't look like an abandoned place for years. There was something recent there, you could feel it. I wanted to leave that same day, but Kaio thought we could wait until morning so as not to drive at night in that isolated place. We locked everything, even dragged a piece of furniture in front of the door, and decided not to touch the subject anymore. But at night, while we were trying to sleep, I heard a noise coming from the woods. It looked like something being dragged. Kaio heard it too. The next day, very early, we decided to go back to that construction just to see if we hadn't imagined too much. And then came the most bizarre part of everything. The mattress was still there, the blanket too. But the clothes on the floor had disappeared. The photos too, at least most of them. The ones that remained were scattered differently, as if they had been scrambled. The door, which we had broken, was now closed again, with the latch pulled inside. We looked at each other without saying anything. There was someone there, or someone had come back after we left. All I know is that I never set foot in that kind of place again. Because if there was someone using that as a hiding place, we certainly weren't welcome there. We decided to notify the owner of the property. We sent a message and explained that we found a suspicious structure around the cabin with items that seemed to belong to other people. He replied hours later, saying that he knew of no other construction on the land other than the main cabin itself. According to him, that area had never been completely mapped, but there was nothing recorded there. His answer only worsened our feeling. What do you mean the owner didn't know about the existence of that construction? The impression I gave was that someone had been using that space for a long time, without anyone noticing. We closed our bags on the same day, and left before the sun went down. The dirt road seemed endless, and at every turn I looked through the rearview mirror. I had the strange feeling that someone could be watching us from the edge of the forest. And you know that construction? Every now and then I wonder if other people found it, if what we saw was part of something much bigger. Because no one simply leaves underwear, photos and signs of recent presence in a place like this. We were lucky to have only found that, and not who put everything there. We had planned that trip months ago. The plan was simple: escape from the city, disconnect a little from the routine, and spend 4 days in an isolated cabin in the middle of the forest. There were 5 of us, me, Jake, Hannah, Trevor, and Emily. We found the place through an online ad, with good reviews and a reasonable price. Everything seemed perfect. The road to there was surrounded by dense trees, and there was barely a cell phone signal. That only made everything more exciting. On the first night, we had a barbecue on the balcony, laughed out loud, drank cheap wine, and talked nonsense until late. The cabin was more modern than we expected, with Wi-Fi, LED light, and even a new electric coffee maker in the kitchen. On the second day, when the weather closed and it started to rain, Jake, who works with IT and can't stay away from technology, decided to connect his cell phone to the house system to play music on Bluetooth speakers. That's when he noticed something strange. Jake frowned and called us. There are 5 devices connected here, in addition to my cell phone. All with names like living room, kitchen, room 1, he said. At first, we thought it was part of the cabin automation. But as he investigated more, he realized that each of these names was linked to a type of IP camera, online monitoring cameras. That gave an ice on everyone's spine. Trevor didn't waste time. He started searching the rooms while Jake tried to access the IPs directly through the notebook. And that's where we found the first one, a micro camera in disguise inside a smoke detector on the ceiling of the room. Then another one on the kitchen clock. The third was built into a lamp in the couple's room. But the worst was when Emily entered the bathroom and, almost vomiting, shouted that there was a camera behind the mirror, pointing straight to the shower. Tension took over the group. We took out the cameras, took pictures of everything, and Jake saved the network records. No one could sleep that night. We were gathered in the living room, trying to understand what to do. Trevor insisted on calling the police, but the cabin was in an isolated area, and the signal was terrible. Emily cried, repeating that someone could be watching everything in real time. We decided to send a message to the owner through the reservation app, trying to stay calm. We found some strange devices connected to the network. Do you know what they are? The answer came minutes later, dry, direct, as if it didn't make any sense. You weren't supposed to find it. Jake immediately disconnected the router. We didn't want to run the risk of anyone else seeing or hearing what was happening there. But the weather had completely changed. That answer, cold, as if we were invading a secret, made us realize that we were being watched from the moment we arrived. The next morning, even before the sun rose, we started to tidy everything up. No one said much. It was as if the silence was safer. When we were putting the bags in the car, we noticed something strange. The padlock of the shed behind the cabin was unlocked, and the door ajar. Jake approached slowly, calling for someone, but there was no answer. The wood creaked under his feet as he pushed the door cautiously. Inside, there was a small bench, tools, and several stacked boxes. In one of them, we found packages of cameras the same as those that were hidden in the house. Further in the background, there was a table with a laptop turned on in hibernation mode. When we turned on the device, we saw that it was connected to the camera system, and all the videos were being stored there. They were files with dates that went far beyond our stay. Several folders with names of previous guests. In many recordings, people were in intimate or vulnerable moments. This was not a security error. It was a pattern. Jake removed the HD from the laptop and put it in his backpack. "Let's take this to the police," he said with a trembling voice. But before we left, something caught our attention. At the back of the shed, there was a chair leaning against the wall, and next to it, a small monitor turned off, attached to an improvised support. As if someone had spent nights there, watching. We don't wait any longer. We got in the car and drove to the police station in the nearest city. We show everything we found. The police acted quickly, but they also seemed uncomfortable, almost as if that was nothing new. When we asked if something similar had ever happened, one of them looked away and just said, "We have been investigating the property for some time." My name is Lindsay, and this was the last weekend I felt completely safe in an isolated place. My husband, Ethan, and I rented a cabin in northern Vermont, in the middle of the forest, with the intention of resting for 4 days away from the city. It was one of those rustic cabins with a wooden balcony, old fireplace, and large windows overlooking the trees. The place looked perfect, no cell phone signal, absolute silence, and the kind of isolation we were looking for. On the second night, around 10 p.m., the power went out of nowhere. No noise, no snap before, just everything suddenly getting dark. We took the flashlights and stayed together in the living room, waiting to come back. The fall lasted about an hour, long enough for me to start wondering if something had caused that. Ethan tried to check the circuit breaker, but everything seemed in order. When the lights finally came back, we laughed at the fright and went to sleep trying not to give importance. The next night, around 11 p.m., I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. While passing through the back window, I noticed a weak light moving between the trees. I found it strange because there were no neighbors nearby and no path that justified someone passing by with a flashlight at that time. The light walked slowly, as if whoever carried it was looking for something, sweeping the ground and tree trunks with slow and deliberate movements. I called Ethan in a low voice and turned off the kitchen light. We both stared in silence. The flashlight stopped. For a few seconds, nothing happened. So she went out. We waited there for more than 10 minutes, trying to listen to anything, but the forest returned to its usual silence. We decided not to go out to investigate. Instead, we turned off all the lights in the cabin and locked ourselves in the room with the feeling that we were being watched. That night, the atmosphere inside the cabin became tense. We were whispering for a while, trying to rationalize what we had seen. Maybe it was a lost hunter, or someone doing some night trail, although it didn't make any sense, considering the remote location and the absence of trails nearby. When we finally managed to fall asleep, we were woken up a little more than 20 minutes later by a dry sound. 3 knocks on the front door. We freeze. Ethan held my hand tightly. The beats were not repeated, nor accompanied by any voice. There was no doorbell, no steps after the sound. He got up slowly and went to the living room, peeking through the side of the curtain without opening it completely. He came back pale. He said there was no one, but that something seemed to lightly touch the handle, as if they were testing if it was unlocked. We spent the rest of the night awake, in silence. We never found out who it was, or what I wanted. The next morning, when we opened the door, there was no sign of footprints or evident marks on the floor, except for a detail that paralyzed us, the flashlight. It was left right in the center of the balcony, facing the door, as if it had been purposely left there. It was a big, old flashlight, with scratches and dirt, the kind of thing you can't buy in any store. None of us had the courage to touch her. We went back inside and started packing our things. We canceled the rest of the stay and left the cabin that morning. We drove in silence for a good part of the way, still trying to understand what had really happened. Maybe it was just someone lost, or maybe we were being watched from the first day. We'll never know. But since that night, I don't rent isolated huts anymore, and I never look at a light in the middle of the forest in the same way. The cabin was rustic, surrounded by dense trees and far enough away from the main road for silence to predominate completely. Derek and Ryan had rented the place for a quiet weekend, away from the noise of the city. On the first night, facing the cutting cold outside, they decided to light the fireplace for the first time. The wood sparked comfortingly, filling the room with a soft warmth and a slight smell of burnt pine. It was already past midnight when the flames began to go out, leaving only a few bright embers. Ryan was almost asleep on the couch when he heard a muffled sound, like a hollow scratch, coming from inside the chimney. Thinking it was a trapped animal, maybe a squirrel, Derek got up and poured a bucket of water on the embers, stifling the rest of the fire. The sound stopped, and the two settled down again, without giving much importance. Around 3 in the morning, Ryan woke up with a different sound, more serious and dragged. He sat on the couch, trying to understand if he had dreamed or if he was still listening to that. This time, it didn't look like an animal. It was like a laugh, low and hoarse, echoing from inside the wall where the chimney was. He called Derek, who also woke up listening to the end of the sound. The two looked at each other, tense. Ryan tried to laugh at the situation, saying that the noise could have come from outside. But Derek didn't answer. He stared at the extinguished fireplace, as if he expected to hear it again. The house was too quiet. They locked the front door again, and went to the rooms, even without being able to sleep immediately. In the morning, Derek got up first and, as he walked to the living room, he noticed something strange. The front door, which he clearly remembered locking with the key, was ajar. The latch was still in place, but the door was pushed, as if someone had forced it. No visible sign of invasion. No footprint. Nothing. In the following hours, they searched the house in search of any indication that someone could have entered, but there were no signs. The lock system was intact, no broken windows. Still, there was something they couldn't explain. The living room carpet was slightly displaced, and there were small traces of soot around the fireplace, as if someone had approached it during the night. Ryan suggested calling the owner of the cabin, but Derek refused. He said he wanted to wait another day before scaring others or making a hasty decision. The next night, they kept all the lights on and didn't turn on the fireplace anymore. But just before 3 in the morning, the laughter returned. Higher. More dragged. This time, both heard clearly. It came from inside the wall, from the space that led to the chimney. Ryan held the flashlight and walked slowly to the fireplace, calling for someone, even without believing he would have an answer. The sound stopped the same moment he approached. The feeling was that the thing, whatever it was, knew they were attentive. Derek, more skeptical, decided to check outside the house if there was any passage or crack in the chimney that could cause that sound, even knowing how unlikely it was. He circled the entire hut with the lantern, but found nothing but absolute silence and motionless trees under the overcast sky. When he returned inside, he found Ryan standing in the living room, white as paper, holding something in his hand, a piece of scorched paper that had been pushed by the fireplace grill. In it, handwritten and with shaky letters, was only, "Don't put out the fire." That was enough. Without arguing, they arranged things in silence and left the hut at dawn. In the car, while driving along the dark and winding road, Ryan commented that he had the feeling that the laughter still echoed in his ears. Derek replied that, since they left, he smelled smoke, even with the windows closed. Neither of them looked back, and to this day, when they try to talk about that night, they can't decide what scared them the most: the sound coming from the chimney, or the idea that someone, or something, was waiting on the other side.